This is the bag that I'm going to show you how to make. I've called it my Miss Messenger bag. It's got a long strap which is long enough to go across the body, but it's also got two shorter handles, so you can actually make the size of the bag bigger. So if you've got a lot of shopping to do, that's ideal for you. There's also a zip pocket just on the front, but that's concealed and makes it quite secure when you're using it with the flap down like so. I haven't used an adjustable strap on this one, but that's quite easy to do if you wanted to put a slider on there. Mine just hook onto the side of the bag with swivel clasps and a couple of D-rings. In the book there's also a little purse to match it as well, so that might be a nice idea for you when you've made your bag. So this is the book. It's called Half Yard Bags and Purses. There's my Miss Messenger bag. And you can see as I flick through, you've got 12 projects that all come with their own matching purses as well. And each one of those uses less than half a metre of fabric, or half a yard of fabric. Now I've already got all of my pieces cut out and all ready to go. Let's get sewing. I don't need the lining pieces for now, so I'm going to put those to one side. I'll have my book there for reference. And these are my outer pieces. I'll try and give you as many tips and hints as I can along the way as well. Those are the pocket pieces, and I've got my little zip there as well. So the first thing we need to do is to sew the faux leather base to the bottom of the bag like so. So right sides together. When you're sewing through thicker fabrics like this, it's ideal to use a denim needle, which is a strong needle. And when you're sewing faux leathers and laminates as such, you'll need a walking foot or a non-slip foot on your sewing machine. Not so much when you're sewing from the back, because this has a knitted back, but when you're sewing from the top, a non-stick foot will help the foot to glide over the fabric without it sticking. Now normally with a bag, if I'm using any kind of interfacings or stabilisers, I like to use a fusible fleece normally. That's actually gone on the lining. I'd normally put that on the outside of the bag because that's the bit that you feel normally, but you can't use that very well with laminates. So I've opened up my seam and I'm just top stitching across the edge, and that's going to give a nice, neat, professional finish to my work. And it helps the seam to sit flat as well. I'm going to stitch across the faux leather part as well now. So try to keep your lines really straight because these are going to be noticeable, so take your time. And a contrast colour would look really good if you have the confidence in sewing in a straight line. So it just gives a really finished look to your work. Let's do the same with the opposite side. So these two pieces sewn right sides together. You can pin if you wish. I find it just as easy with projects like this not to. If you're going to pin with laminates and faux leathers, then try and pin within the seam allowance. And that way you won't leave holes in your fabric. So just a little bit of top stitching here now. And across the faux leather side. So I've got the front and back pieces sewn together. The next thing we're going to do is to add the zip. My faux leather is a little bit too long there. I'm just going to trim that back down. Sometimes fabric seems to grow as you're sewing with it. Nice thing about bag making, I think, particularly if you're new to sewing. You're creating something that's useful, so that doesn't take an awful lot of time to make, that you can enjoy making, and you can personalise it as well. So your bag isn't going to be the same as anybody else's bag. Let's do the pocket next. So I'll take my 2 pocket pieces. I'm just looking at my measurements. On the lining section here, I'm going to draw a box for the zip. All of these measurements are in your book. So this needs to be central, and I'm going to do that about 1.5 inches from the top. And it's 1/2 inch wide. And this is the box that the zip's going to sit inside. I call it a letterbox zip because you post the fabric through it. So down to 7 inches there, and finish off the box. I'm using a water erasable pen. It really doesn't matter what kind of marking tool you use, because you won't see these lines. Draw a line straight down the centre of the box, and then just into a V shape at each end, like so. We'll then place this over the front of the bag, and that's 5.5 inches from the top of the bag. So I'm going to measure that with my ruler. So 5.5 inches from here, and that needs to go right in the centre. So I'll just put a couple of pins in there to hold it in place, like so. And then I'm going to sew all the way around the edge of the box. So use quite a small stitch for this to make the seam strong. So I'm going to go down to 2.2 on my machine and sew. So when you come to the corner of the box, stop with your needle in the down position, turn your work around, and then carry on. Needle down, turn around, carry on. So keeping my work nice and flat. Now it would be quite easy. I was saying about personalising your bag and making it suitable for your needs. Maybe you want extra pockets on the inside. You could quite easily put a pocket like this on the inside so it's nice and secure. Or you could add maybe a patch pocket or pen pockets. I tend to like extra pockets on my bags so that I don't lose my car keys in the bottom of the bag, or I can hear the phone ringing but I can't find it anywhere. Now we're going to cut straight down the centre of that line and into each one of the corners. So a nice sharp pair of scissors. Love that crunching sound. Careful not to cut through the stitches, but as close to them in the corner as you can get. Like so. Now this is why I call it a letterbox zip, because I'm now going to post the fabric through the centre. So lining goes through the hole. I tell you what makes it a little bit easier is if you were to just press away from the seam or over the seam before you turn it through. Just seems to help keep the seam flat. So this goes through the middle of here. Over to the back. And then we need to press this seam so that it's right on the edge and the corners are nice and neat. If you haven't snipped quite far enough into the corners at this stage, you can always go back again, turn it over and then just, there we go, just snip a little bit closer. So the corner should be square and you're left with a letterbox shaped hole, like so. Now to put the zip in. I tend to use zips that are a little bit too long for what I need, or if I'm making a bag or a cushion cover, then part of a continuous zip would work really well. And I'm not going to hand tack this like I used to do. I'm going to use a fabric glue. So I'm just going to put a strip of glue around the edge of the hole. Don't use paper glue for this because I'm going to sew through this on my sewing machine. Glues that are designed for fabric aren't going to gunk up your sewing machine needle. That's the last thing that you want. So make sure that any kind of adhesives that you're using with fabric are designed for fabric. Now this goes over the top. I'm just going to stick it down gently from the back, then turn it over and arrange from the front. Now if you're using a regular zip, you'll have stoppers on each end, the metal bits, and I'd like those to be out of the way, which is why I like zips that are generally too long. So if that's an 8-inch zip, I'd maybe go for a 9 or a 10-inch zip, and then I can cut the ends off and it keeps it neater and there's less risk of sewing over those metal bits. So if I just leave that for a few seconds just to stick, it is a temporary glue, so it's not going to be rock hard or anything. And then I'm just going to sew around the edge of that box. Now I'm not using a zipper foot on my machine. I sometimes find you don't need to. Again, stop with the needle down. When you come to that slider, move it out of the way, because we don't want wobbly stitches as we go around the box. So again, leave the needle down so that you can carry on with your stitch line in the same direction. So just keep sewing and back down the final side. Let's move that slider out of the way and carry on. Don't worry about sewing over a nylon zip. I'd go a little bit slower as I approach it, but not going to damage your sewing machine. If you're using a zip with metal teeth, then I would avoid sewing over it at all costs. So there's my zip neatly in place. Now we need to sew on the back of the pocket. Right sides together. Again, if your zip's still a little bit too long now, you can still trim that down. And we're going to sew these two pocket pieces together, but not through the bag. So let's lift this up and just put a couple of pins in there to hold it in place. And then we sew all the way around the edge, but again, not through the actual bag fabric. So again, stop with the needle down, carefully push the outer bag fabric out of the way and carry on sewing. And never sew over pins either. I've never damaged, I've sewn over them accidentally and I haven't damaged or broken a needle, but it does worry me that that might happen one day, and it's where the end of the pin is going to fly off to. So that's the pocket finished. So you can see from the front of the bag, all you see is the zip. From the back of the bag, there's your pocket. Then we're going to make the handles and the little tabs. So I'll need my iron again. I've cut my handles to 4 inches wide, and I'm going to fold each one to the centre and press. Then the long edges again to the centre and press. And again. And then the whole length in half, so the raw edges are tucked away inside, and press. Then the same with the second handle. If your fabric is a little bit floppy, then you could use some spray starch, so you get a really crisp fold then. And I'm using quite a heavy fabric. This is like a really soft canvas, like a linen look kind of weight. So I haven't used any fusible fleece on the inside of it, but if you do have a very fine fabric, then that may be an idea for you. These are the little tabs at the side. I've cut them a little bit longer than need be, but I just find that easier. Always better to have too big or too long and cut down than too short and having to start again, I say. Right, let's again, I'm just doing the same as I did with the handle, so to the centre, fold it over and press. And then I'm going to top stitch down both sides of each one of those pieces. Nice thing is with bags like these, they are achievable projects no matter what kind of sewing machine you have. So you don't have to have something that's all the bells and the whistles and an expensive sewing machine. The only stitch I'm using is a straight stitch. I'm using, actually the foot on my sewing machine has a built-in walking foot element. So unless you're using a laminated fabric, then you won't need a walking foot or a non-stick foot. And you may not even need a zipper foot, but most sewing machines come with those anyway. And no fancy stitches, I'm just using a straight stitch. So follow the same with these two. And then finally, the second little tab. There, and these are just about finished. So let's take the front of my bag again. That will need a press. I like to give everything a good steam when I've finished. Then I'll need 2 D-rings. Oh, there they are. And these go through the little tab and fold over. Because these are, the fabric's folded so that it's 1 inch wide, they fit a 1 inch D-ring perfectly. And I've got some nice chunky D-rings there. This is going to be sewn facing inwards, just to the side of the bag here. And again, you'll measure and mark and use all of the measurements in the book so that you get everything in the right place. And the same on the opposite side. I'm just going to do this by eye, but again, if you're not too sure, then take your ruler and measure to make sure they're in exactly the right position. If you have some fabric clips, maybe Clover Wonder clips on thicker fabric, that may be easier than pinning for you. I'm just going to sew this in place within the seam allowance. I'm using 1/2 inch seam allowance throughout, but these are just like tacking stitches or basting stitches. So I don't want to see them on the outside of the bag, so I'm going to sew really close to the edge to hold those in place. And then I can trim off the tabs that were a little bit too long, like so. Now with the handles at the top, these again are going to be sewn facing downwards. Nice if they line up with the edge of the zip, that's aesthetically pleasing. So we'll have a couple of pins in there. Make sure they're not twisted, it's very easy to get your handles twisted. And I'm just going to fold this in half. Again, you can measure with a ruler. Not quite the same distance there. Move that one over. And then we'll do the same with the handles on the opposite side. And I'm just going to kind of match the two up. So that goes there, again facing down. Make sure it's not twisted around to here. You can buy handles, but I think it's quite nice to make your own. You get the perfect matching fabric as well. Although I do think a little bit of hardware gives a bag a shop bought look. That's why I like to add things like a metal D-rings or the swivel clasp and magnetic snaps and the like. There we go. That's just tacked into the seam allowance. Do the same on this side. Don't worry too much about finishing seams in a bag because everything's going to be lined, so you won't actually see the seams inside unless you have a very loose weave fabric where there's a risk that maybe it'll fray with use, in which case just a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine will be fine. You don't have to go out and buy an overlocker for things like that. Okay, so that's how we're looking at the front so far. So then we'll take a look at the lining. I've already fused fleece to the wrong side of each pieces. This is a Valaiseline H640 and it's a polyester fleece that has like bubbly bits on one side, and when you iron them it just fuses to your fabric. But this gives your bag a little bit of stability. It makes it a little bit firmer, a little bit more solid. I also have my magnetic snaps, which I'm going to put to each side of the top. So if you haven't fitted these before, this is how you do it. I need to measure, so 1.5 inches from the top and mark the centre point, which is there. Your magnetic snap comes with a fat bit, that's the magnet, and a thin bit, and then 2 back bits. Take one of the back bits and place the hole in the middle over the dot that you've just drawn. This is a bit confusing because my fabric's got dots all over it. I know which one my dot was, it was the little one. And then you're going to draw a line along each side like so. And then take a very sharp pair of scissors, or you could use a quick unpick, and we're going to cut through those holes. Keep the cut really small because you can always make a small cut bigger, but if you make a big cut, you've just got a big cut. It's not the end of the world. Take the 2 prongs from one side of your clasp and push them through, and then put the back on and squish the legs open. It doesn't matter whether they go inwards or outwards, I just find it easier to squish them outwards. And then the same on the opposite side. If you have a fabric with a directional print, so in other words it can only go one way round, make sure that you're putting this at the top. I think we all at some point have ended up either forgetting to put snaps on, which again can be done afterwards, it's not the end of the world, or you put the fabric the wrong way around. I've done that before. Right, so 2 little marks there. Just put the lid on my pen so it doesn't dry, and do the same again. If you do make the holes too big, I would take a little wet glue, like a Gutermann HT2, and put a patch of fabric on the back and put some glue actually on the back over the hole and leave it to dry and then start again. And normally that will, as long as it's not a massive cut, that should work to seal the holes up. So now that's the lining. So I've got the two pieces and they fasten like so. We're going to cut a 1.5 inch square from each bottom corner of the bag, and this is what's going to make the base square. The bigger the square that you cut, the bigger the base of your bag will be. And again, I'm just using that water erasable pen because I had it to hand. But you won't see any of these markings because these will be within the seam allowance. So again, let's just 1.5 inches, there you are. Mark all of these. And the same on the outer bag. And on this side. With water erasable, if it is visible, maybe you accidentally mark your fabric. Don't worry too much about it because it will wipe off. You don't have to put whatever it is you're making in the washing machine. You can just get a damp cloth and just give it a wipe. The one thing to remember though is that with air or water erasable pens, don't iron them. Or don't iron over the pen markings because they will become permanent. Doesn't matter on something like this because it's on the inside of the bag. But if that's on something that you're quilting, then you certainly don't want those lines to be there forevermore. So cut out each one of those corners. You could quilt this bag actually, that would be a nice idea. In which case you'd need your padding or your fleece or whatever you're using to be on the side that you're quilting, so you'd have to put it on this side. So you can put your wadding on the outside of the bag. If you don't use the faux leather, because that won't take heat from the front, or you could just use a basting spray instead of fusing with an iron. There's a way around all of these things. If you want to quilt over a faux leather, then there are ways that you can do it. Okay, so 4 corners cut out of the bottom of each of the outer pieces. Now we can start putting the whole thing together. So we'll take one of the outer pieces. If you're going to put another pocket on the inside, do that now at this point. Let's take this outer piece and we're going to sew across the top with the handle tucked down just across there. And we'll do that on both pieces. So I'm just arranging that handle so it's facing downwards, it's not causing any lumps. And again, if you wanted to pin, that's entirely up to you, or use your clips if you have them. But I found it just as easy not to. Just keep the edges of the fabric lined up together. And so. So we have that. Now we need another one. Again, make sure the handle is tucked in. And it's the top of the lining, the one with the magnetic snaps. Keep the handles nice and square. And away we go. I think this is a nice size of bag as well. You could enlarge or decrease the size if you wanted a bigger one to maybe keep a tablet in. But it's a good size work bag. You can fit a lot in here. 2 long pieces like so. Then we're going to sew these right sides together. Right, now I want to make sure that this seam at the top is matching on both sides, so that's where I'm going to start. And I'm going to sew all the way around both sides, leaving a gap in the bottom so I can turn the whole thing through, and I'm not going to sew over those cut out corners. So just making sure my seams match up, and away we go. There's quite a few different styles of books in the bag, of bags in the book. Large ones, small ones, some that can be adapted for baby bags, overnight bags. But I'd like to explain working with different types of fabric and different techniques. Because once you've made a zip like that, you can put a zip like that into any bag. Not the kind of zip that you put into a garment, but it's a technique that maybe you're learning for the first time. Once you've squared a bag base off, you can take a pattern for, I don't know, a tote bag that doesn't have a square base and make it square so you can adapt things. So I like to give you as much information as I can about techniques so that you can put your own spin on things. I did see actually on my Facebook page when I was promoting this event, I said that I'd be making this bag. And it was so nice because so many of you have made it already. And it looks very different in different coloured fabrics. And for some of you, it was the first time you'd ever made it. And that was really nice. Making something like this for a very first project, I think is quite an achievement, isn't it? And remember, every one of the bags has the little purse to go with it as well. So it's nice to be coordinated, isn't it? I've just lengthened the stitch slightly over the fleeced side because I tend to find that the fleece makes the machine drag a little bit. Now I need to leave that gap across the bottom, remember. So there we go, come on. Stitch a few stitches and then reverse backwards. There's my gap, and then carry on sewing on the other side. I'm not back tacking or reverse stitching at the ends of seams that go into seams. So if you're wondering, I would do normally, but not when a seam disappears into another one because that makes it stable anyhow. There. Now we're going to make those square corners, the cutout corners square. So pull the sides of the fabric away from each other so that the side seam sits over the top of the bottom seams, like so, and then we'll sew straight across. There are reverse stitch. And as I'm sewing, I'm squishing the seams in opposite directions. So I'm not worried about pressing seams open on something like this. I just give it a squish. Make sure that they're squished in the same direction, but squish them like that, and then sew straight across. Just makes the seam a little less bulky. And the same on the outer back. So this is across the laminated side. So again, pull it open, squish the seams, and sew. And the same on this side, squish the seams, and sew. And then we'll turn the whole thing through. So have you had a lovely day today? Have you enjoyed it? Have you watched all of the demonstrations? Been with us for the whole day? Have you learnt something new? Are you going to have a try at maybe needle felting or rag rugging or something that you might not have done before? Right, let's push this through. Maybe this is what you haven't done before. Maybe sewing is new to you. Maybe you're a crocheter or a knitter. Do you know, have a go at sewing. Welcome to my world. You see how the corner bit there, that cut out corner, just looks really nice and neat. And of course the same in the lining. Now with the lining, if you want to be really, really neat, you could hand sew this, but I'm not. I'm going to pull each side of that seam away from each other like that, and you'll find the edges kind of automatically fold in. And I'm going to sew straight across the hole, quite close to the edge. Do all layers. Let's sew. Then the lining section is pushed inside the outside, if that makes sense. There you go. This will need a good old press. Do you remember, if you are using a faux leather though, do avoid putting the heat near there. You can press it from the wrong side if you're careful. But avoid putting the iron near the top. But some of them you can just give them a good blast of steam and that seems to work. So you can see how we're looking now. Now to make it nice and neat around the top, I'm going to top stitch, so I can do a longer stitch again there. If you've got a free arm on your sewing machine, it can be really useful. I don't. And it's at times like this, I really quite miss it. But I'm just making sure that that seam is sitting on the top. If it's easier, you could iron that before you sew it. Over that thick seam. So again, even on a powerful machine, I'm going to just take that easy as I go over a very thick lump. Let's keep manoeuvring this so that the seam's on the end. Nice straight line. And almost back to the beginning. Now over that side seam, over you go. And there we are. So now we have a long bag with a magnetic snap in the top that flops over like so. Now we need to make the strap for the side bits here. And I'm using a faux leather again for mine. I have already made one up, but I just wanted to give you some tips on how to do that when you're using something like this, because it is difficult to pin. Normally with the, like with the handles, I folded them to the centre again, and then pressed them. You can't do that with a faux leather because again, you're not going to be able to press it. And it is quite bouncy and it does want to fight back. So you can either fold to the centre, hold it down, hold it down, fold it down, hold it, flip it over, clip it, and then sew. But I've got an easier way. If you have some basting spray, I'm just going to do it down here because I've got a spare piece of paper on the floor, and I'm just going to spray the back of it. Shan't do all of it, just to show you. And then when you fold over the end bit, it sticks down. It's brilliant. And then I can go to the centre. Again, this is for fabric, so don't go using any other paper glue or anything like that. That goes to the centre like so. It's positionable spray, so I can pull it apart if I need to. Then this bit is going to get sprayed as well. And then fold in half again. And then I've got a nice flat piece of fabric that's so much easier to sew than trying to sew through a fabric that just wants to open itself up. I've made the end nice and neat. Each end of this is going to go through your swivel lobster clasp, and then that hooks onto the bag. But again, I have already made one up because I'm aware that we are running out of time, I think, now. So this is it. And again, it's a faux leather is quite simple to sew through. A denim needle is a strong needle, so you don't need a leather needle for this. Leather needles are shaped a bit like a chisel, so they make small slits in the leather, and that stops the thread from dragging through, but they just leave quite a hole. On leather, that can seal itself back up again, but you don't need to use that on a faux leather like this. So that's just slit through the edge, fastened over and sewn. And this goes on here. And this one goes on here, and I've got a knot right in the middle of it. How did that happen? That one goes on there, and that is my Miss Messenger bag finished. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you go buy the book and you have a go yourself. Enjoy.